All right, once again, we're going to talk about the developer's role, right? Just giving us a brief rundown of what the developers do, who are developers. Most of us who are here probably have heard of the developer's role, right? We do understand that in Scrum, even before we talk about Scrum, in software development in itself, right? That's where the word developers came from, development, right? We're building stuff, we're developing stuff, so they're developing software. That's why they call them developers for short. Developer is one of the three Scrum roles. With the 2020 Scrum Guide, it used to be called development team prior to 2020, but there was an update in 2020, and there's no longer the word development team, right? The reason why was the QA, which is the quality analyst on the team, felt separated from the developers who are the ones writing the code. So 2020 Scrum Guide basically summed it up as developers. So anybody doing the work is known as a developer, right? So whether you're the one writing the programmer, writing the code, or the QA testing the code, or the business analyst analyzing, or the designer or UI UX coming up with the screens and mockups, or any database person, anybody doing the work is regarded as a developer. But today we want to talk about software developers themselves, right? So who are software developers, right? A developer is also known as a programmer. Some people call them coders, right? They write code. Some people call them engineers, software engineers. But they're basically IT professionals who use programming languages to create computer software, right? So these guys use programming languages. I'm sure we've heard a couple of programming languages like Java, .NET, C++, C#, various programming languages out there, Python. There's just too many, right? I can't remember. Node.js, JavaScript, whatever they call them. But these are the languages that some of them specify in them. Some of them are very broad in many languages, but they write code using some of these languages, right? And the software developers conceive the design and they build computer programs. So most of the systems we use today, it's because the software developer built or wrote the code. So from the laptop that you're using or the mobile device you're using to join today, or even Zoom that we are all connected right now, it wasn't possible without software developers who sat down day and night writing code and testing those codes. So they conceived the design, they built, and that's how we're able to connect. So you can hear my voice today. So some of them develop new applications, like I said, from mobile to desktop, even the cars that we drive today, systems that we use, firmware, hardware, they're all powered by some level of software, right? Developers identify the user needs, and that is why we talk about product owners, backlogs, because developers write code for people, right? They write code for end users, customers, clients, and then they build programs. They also test all of these programs, right? I mean, they also make improvements, because when you build, remember the software development life cycle. After we build and release, we have to maintain. And in maintaining is where we make improvements, right? We can always do better. So what is the role of the software developers? Again, they write, test, debug. Debugging meaning if there's issues, they try and find out what the issues are. That's a debugging way. And the maintenance applications, right? The role can vary, right, depending on what organization you find yourself in. They engage in identifying, designing, installing, and testing the software system that they have built for a company from the ground up. Developers will also document some of the codes they've written. They test the client software. They write code to create applications that either can stand alone or boost access to servers or services. So what are types of developers? This is very important for you to know. And just in case, for those on the job, you probably have heard some of this. Some might even be on the job right now and haven't heard of these types of developers. And for those that are new, please don't forget this. The first type of developer you hear about are front-end developers, right? Some people call them client side because they build systems that are client facing, like consumer facing. If you download any app on your phone today and you launch that app, you're going to get what we call a user interface, right? A UI, right? It's because a front-end developer sat down to write that code or design a code, and you can see it from your naked eyes, right? That is a user interface. So front-end developer, they're sometimes referred to as a web developer. They specialize in the development of user interface design for the user-facing side of an application or website. This involves visual design elements, including the layout and aesthetics, and thorough understanding of how people interact with and use these computer programs. So a front-end developer must really understand user behavior, right? and understanding how people are going to interface or interact with that system that they're building in. They also need to know how to code and how the code runs on different operating systems, right? There are some people who specifically just design and they do just UI work or UI UX, but front-end developers will write code at the same time design, right? So just so you remember, UI UX are some people that just do designing alone. Front-end developers will write code and also do designing. So as a front-end developer, some skills that you need to have is UI or UX. UI stands for user interface. UX stands for user experience. So basically the UX means the experience of the user when they launch an application. Is the color nice? Is it too bright? Is it too dark? How does the user log in, log out? Things like that is the experience of the user. That's why it's called UX, user experience. And UI is just talking about the interface, the look and feel. So this for a front-end developer, they have to have a skill that is UI and UX frameworks. CSS stands for cascading style sheet. This is just a type of language to design. JavaScript, HTML, most of us will understand the early days of the internet, HTML, hypertext markup language, that's what it means. So these are the skills that a front-end developer should possess. Now we talk about back-end developers, right? They also call them, they work on the server side, right? Like it says the back end, right? Things that you don't see, things that we, the users, don't see, things that drive the front end, right? For you to click on login, something is connecting, calling something before you can log in. When you click login while it's loading, it's connecting to the server again, trying to verify your details, validate your details. Now, a backend developer specify and specialize in the design, implementation, functional core logic, the performance, the scalability of a piece of software or system running on machines that are remote from the end user. Like I said, the end user would not see what's going on in the back end. Backend systems can grow to be very complex, but their complexity is often not visible to the users. An example is the Google search engine. When you go to google.com and you type something, you're looking for something you're researching, it quickly loads a result. But it took a lot of backend developers who have written different scripts, codes, logics, for it to crawl the internet, the World Wide Web, and render you those results. Those results that come to you, that's the front end. But in the back end, things that happen, these things are made possible by backend developers. Backend developers often need to integrate with a vast array of services such as databases, data storage systems, caching systems, logging systems, and email systems. A backend developer works with programming languages such as Java, C, C++, Ruby, Perl, Python, Scala. There's so many programming languages out there, over 100. But at least if you guys have not heard of anything, or if you do not know Java, it should be one of your languages you're going to always talk about. If someone asks you, what language did your team write code on? Or what language does your team work on? You can always name drop Java, right? Java is owned by Sun Microsystem, one of the very early programming languages in the .com era. All right, so full stack developer. And this is the ideal situation that companies are looking for. And the full stack is basically someone who does front end and back end together, right? You hardly find these people, although they exist, but for some reason, there are not that many out there. So difficult companies, this is the ideal situation, but I think also there's a challenge around full stack developers being overwhelmed by doing too much. So that's why sometimes they specify and say, we're looking for front-end developer, we're looking for a back-end developer, we're looking for a tester. Because a full stack developer will do front-end, back-end, test, does everything, do full stack. That's where they call the name from. They do the full stack. So they're fluent in front-end, back-end, they understand all the skills, responsibilities. And that's why we call them full stack engineers. These individuals possess all the skills necessary to create a fully functional web app, from the front-facing user experience to the complex systems behind it. Of course, they have those merged skills of the UI, UX frameworks, the CSS, the JavaScript, HTML, Java, C, C++, Ruby, Perl, Python, Scala, Go, Kubernetes, Docker, Apache, Jenkins, HashiCorp, all of these various programming languages. I don't expect you to know all of them, but always remember Java, Python, Ruby. At least if you're asking an interview, you should ask you for what technologies your team worked with. You can ask them, do you mean programming languages? And they say yes. They remember Java is a programming language. There's .NET, there's C, there's Ruby, there's Perl, there's Python. At least have like 3 in your head from today on that you can always talk about that your team worked on. Again, as Scrum Masters, we're not supposed to know any of these skills, right? But if you're truly working with a team, then it's expected that you know the environment that they're working on, the programming language that they're working with, right? So that's why it's always good for you to have these names so you can name drop them. But as a Scrum Master, we're not technical. We're not required to write any line of code. We're not even required to understand the code base, but we should understand what our team is working on, how they do their work. And they have what they call the mobile app developers, right? It's not necessarily a specific type of skill, because in the mobile app developer could be a front end, could be back end, could be a full stack developer. The only difference is nowadays you find niche-based developers that they specify in just building mobile applications, right? You'll see some job ads. Some people are looking for iOS engineers. These are people that specifically build software on Apple devices. iOS is the Apple operating system, right? So when you hear of an iOS engineer, this is someone whose specification is just to build iOS devices. And you hear of Android developers. Their duty is to just build Android devices. You might also hear of Salesforce developer. Their duty is to build just Salesforce applications. So whenever you hear a specific system and the developer is just saying that this person is focusing on that particular niche, right? So you might hear DevOps engineer, that means that person just works on DevOps alone and things like that. So the reason why I bring this here is in case you ever hear of specific developers, just know that they could be front end, they could be back end, they could be full stack. They're just in the niche category. So mobile development was almost unheard of before the early 2000s, and we know about that. And the explosion of smartphones definitely changed the game. And then you see a lot of people that are skilled in one particular operating system. You also hear, is it called cross-platform? I think it's called cross-platform, where a developer can build across multiple platforms. So they can build for iOS, they could build for Android, they could build for Blackberries, Windows, whatever the type of mobile phone or operating system. But you also have a lot of niche-based developers. So a mobile developer understands the intricacies of mobile operating systems, such as iOS and Android, development environment, the frameworks that they use to write the software on those operating systems. They use Java again. Java again is a widely spread programming language. Swift is very specific to Apple. I think it's owned by Apple. So if you want to write an Apple software for an iPhone or iPad or maybe with a Mac, you're going to use Swift as a programming language or environment. And of course, Swift and Swift UI is basically the same, and there's one called Objective-C. So yeah, these are mobile developers. All they do is they work specifically on, or they specialize in mobile app development. All right, so this was a short one. So I'm going to leave it open for questions, suggestions, and comments. Thank you.
Yes, I will